All right, I'm Wes Blankenship reporting for Dog Post tonight at Mercedes-Benz Stadium after LSU beat Georgia 37-10. And I'll admit it, I was wrong. I thought Georgia's defense had a legitimate shot to come in and really give Joe Burrow and LSU's offense a test. If you look historically at how good defenses do against good defenses usually find a way to win. The team with the better defense historically finds a way to win the game. They usually win the SEC championship. And that's just not the way it went down tonight. Joe Burrow was amazing. He had, I'm going to look up what all of his stats were just to put a bow on that. But I really want to harp on and focus on Georgia's season and what this loss meant for them tonight, because I think it was a massively underperforming effort from the Dogs. And I think it really ends up being a pretty disappointing season. And that's where Georgia is right now. And Kirby doesn't shy away from that. He said coming in, we expect to compete for championships year in and year out. And look, I know you had injuries at receiver. I know that Fromm got banged up a little bit there in the game. And I know that the offense has really not been what you expected it to be this season. But I go back to 2017, even before Alabama won the national championship. 2019 was a year that Georgia fans, the media, all had circled as a year where Georgia should be expecting to, at the very least, contend and compete in the college football playoff. And it just goes to show you how much things change year in and year out. But I also think Georgia, based on the talent it has on its roster and on offense, and you have every opportunity to recruit more talented wideouts. I know you lost those players to the league. I'm not saying that those weren't factors. I just don't necessarily want to hear about them as excuses for why Georgia underperformed. This defense is one of the best that Georgia's ever had. It's the best that Kirby Smart's ever had. And was it a case of Georgia didn't really play anybody that would test them all year, or is LSU really that good? I think it's a little bit of both. I do think LSU really is that good, and I think that if you don't have the Tigers at number one in the college football playoff standings tomorrow, I'm going to call the police, because the Tigers are the real deal. They've played the toughest schedule, and they look good doing it. Game in, game out. But let's see what Joe Burrow did against the Dogs. I'm sure you've tuned in. I'm sure you've seen what he did. But he's the Heisman, you know? There's no ifs, ands, or buts around it. 45 touchdown passes on the season. He had 4 tonight, 390 yards, 28 of 38. He was the real deal. Georgia couldn't shake him, couldn't phase him. They got pressure, but when they did get pressure, his feet, he was so springy. He was like bouncy back there tonight. And the Dogs really just couldn't contain him. If they did get pressure, he found a way to shake out. He had his Heisman moment tonight, a 71-yard passing strike after he shook 2 Georgia defensive linemen. I mean, it really made Georgia's defense look silly. If you've watched Georgia's defense this year, you know how good they are. And you just saw the real deal tonight, guys. You did. And I fully expect LSU will be playing in the national championship game after really dismantling Georgia. So enough about LSU. What does this mean for the Dogs? I think Georgia, moving forward, is in a state of identity crisis, especially on offense. And I'm not trying to overreact based off of one loss, but let's look at the facts here. Georgia loses the national championship after the 2017 season. They are close with Alabama in last year's SEC championship game, but still lose, don't make the playoffs. Tonight, they had a chance to make the playoffs and got blown out. So qualitatively, quantitatively, Georgia's gotten worse each of the last 2 years. The big mystery is that offense. And Kirby Smart, as I said, it's identity crisis time. I know you've recruited the best offensive lineman, your RBU, but how do you adapt? How do you evolve? Because tonight, Georgia went down 14-0. Even at that point, did you realistically think that Georgia had a shot to come back based on the way they run their offense, based on the fact that DeAndre Swift clearly wasn't healthy? They got in a hole. They had to start throwing it more. That's always a bad recipe for Jake Fromm and for Georgia. He's taken a step back this season. I'm sure there are other factors. The receivers, one of them. The offensive line impacted by that, because the longer you're waiting for a receiver to get open, the longer the line has to block, the more fatigued they get, and the more it impacts the rest of your game. But we can't deny that Jake Fromm this season, especially the last 5 games, is not the Jake Fromm we're used to seeing. So I think that's a big question, and I think we'll see how Kirby Smart handles it. I know we're yet to see if Jake Fromm will come back. I have no inside information on this, just my opinion. I believe he will be back. DeAndre Swift spoke in the locker room after the game. He says he's just focusing on his shoulder. Fully expect him to enter the NFL draft, as many NFL caliber running backs of his talent level do. So we'll see about that. He says he hopes to play in the Dogs bowl game, wherever that may be. We'll see about that. I don't blame him if he doesn't. He's got to protect his body. But the crazy thing for me, too, is Georgia started the game with 7 passes and 3 rushing attempts in his first 10 plays of the game. So it's not even when Georgia got behind, they waited to start throwing it a lot more. They were throwing it more from the get-go. And that was a troubling sign for me coming into the game, was if Georgia gets away from what it did all season, which is run first, that either shows me that they think they're going to have to put up a lot of points early because they don't think they can come back if LSU scores a ton, or they're saving some type of scheme, some type of attack for this big game. And obviously that wasn't the way to go. It didn't work out for them tonight. I don't know if anything really would have made a difference tonight. LSU was clearly going to put up points, but when you have 2 Jake Fromm interceptions, you give the ball back right away, you can't extend drives, you have a lot of big drops. Georgia's receiving core did not help Jake Fromm out at all. I know he had throws that he could have made, could have hit, wishes he did. But there were just a lot of factors there getting in Georgia's offensive way, as we'd seen for a lot of this season, to be honest. So how does Georgia grow? How do they adapt? They're going to have to. Early look ahead to next season, you got to play at Tuscaloosa. Bo Nix isn't going away, and he gave you everything you wanted in Auburn a couple weeks ago. He's only a true freshman. So the schedule, as it always is, continues to get tougher. Tennessee showing some life in this season. I expect they will be better next season. So it's not getting any easier for Georgia to make it to this game. And this is the college football play-in game most years, unless you come in undefeated like LSU did. And for that matter, I know that the loss to South Carolina is what people pointed to as the game that would keep Georgia out of the playoff if they lost tonight. Honestly, even if Georgia had beaten South Carolina and came into this game undefeated, if they play the way they played tonight, do you really think the committee would have kept them in? I think there would have been a strong debate to keep them out, to be honest. But none of that matters now, clearly. Georgia has to address its offense because, like I said, getting to the SEC championship game still means something if you trip up during the season. So if they don't address what's going on offense, you're going to continue to see games where they're playing a playoff caliber team, and Georgia, if it gets behind early, can't match up and can't come back. This is a good defense. Georgia had a fantastic defense this season. I still have every reason to believe they were as good as their ratings showed that they were, and a spread historically good. Okay, I'll give LSU that. They won't face an offense like that every single year, but you don't have to use too much of your imagination to figure they're going to keep getting better on offense as more teams adapt and show what LSU's putting on film and what they're putting on the field. So a lot to address, a lot of soul searching for Georgia, and their season, effectively, their goals fall short tonight in Atlanta. They'll play in probably a New Year's Six bowl game, but like we saw in the Sugar Bowl last year against Texas, if their heart's in it, do you expect them to show up and give it their all? I don't know. Ultimately, I come away from this season thinking that Georgia failed. I do. You make it to the SEC championship game, but that's not what Georgia is about under Kirby Smart. He doesn't shy away from that. His players don't shy away from that. And I think if you are not willing to acknowledge that, despite the excuses of the injuries and the coaching turnover and everything, that happens in college football. You have to be ready to adapt and roll with those punches and continue to be great. And Georgia couldn't get it done. That's the bottom line. They couldn't find a way to get it done. All that stuff aside, Georgia should have been a playoff caliber team this year. Their defense had every opportunity to keep them there and have them in that striking distance. And even with that huge offensive line, even with a deep running backfield, and I know that Pickens missed the first half. I know Cager was out. Those things hurt. But you still have some really talented players. Demetrius Robertson was the #1 player in America coming out of high school at his position. You know, like, you have these skill players there, and Georgia can't find a way to make it happen. James Cook, still a lot left on the table. I think a lot of fans wish they would have seen more from James Cook. So those are just two players examples where Georgia's just not able to make it happen on offense by this time of the year. First week in December, you kind of are who you are. Georgia got away from that. Even if they stuck with it, they didn't have the rhythm to make it count against LSU. So another year of experience. Maybe the wideouts get better, and maybe they find a better rhythm with Jake Fromm, but they have a lot of work to do. Kirby Smart has a lot of work to do with what he wants this program to look like as the offense relates to the defense. And does that mean that James Coley stays and they reinvent what they do? Or does it mean that Kirby Smart looks for another answer like Nick Saban did with Lane Kiffin and like LSU's done with Joe Brady? So a lot to reevaluate, a lot for Georgia to consider and try to do, because tonight's result isn't going to get any better if you don't make big changes or some fundamental changes on what you're doing on offense. I'm Wes Blankenship reporting for Dog Post. Y'all have a great December, a great holiday season, and thanks for watching. Catch you next time. Mic check, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1.